When a waitress served Dwayne Johnson at a quiet cafe, she expected nothing more than a routine shift. But what he left behind, a note and a tip, brought her to tears and sparked a conversation across the nation. The smell of espresso mixed with faint notes of fresh pastries lingered in the air. The afternoon lull had stretched longer than usual, and the hum of conversation in the cafe had finally tapered to a murmur. For Dinah, the shift felt like a marathon. Every tick of the clock seemed to slow. Every clink of cutlery was just another reminder that she'd been on her feet for hours. She wiped the last table by the window and checked her phone. Just one more hour. Rent was due in 2 days and her phone bill sat unpaid. Tips that day had been pitiful. Mostly small change tossed half-heartedly onto the table by busy patrons who never looked up from their phones. Dinah exhaled, pulled her hair into a tighter ponytail, and grabbed the order pad. Her manager, an older woman with tired eyes, gave her a glance as if to say hang in there, but Dinah was already on autopilot. Then the bell above the door rang. The sound startled her back into focus. A young man stepped in, tall, lean, dressed in a plain shirt and slacks that made him look effortlessly put together. 2 men followed close behind, blending almost too well into the backdrop, their sharp eyes taking in every corner of the room. The cafe wasn't exactly a hotspot for high-profile guests. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect celebrities, let alone someone who came with what looked like security. For a moment, Dinah froze, her pen hanging over the pad, but professionalism kicked in, and she walked toward the table in the far corner where the young man had settled. "Good afternoon," Dinah said, trying to muster her best smile. "Can I get you something to start?" The young man looked up, and for a moment, Dinah nearly forgot what she was supposed to say. His face was striking, but there was something familiar about him. His features, the slight calmness in his expression. Then it clicked. Dwayne Johnson. Dinah had seen his face plastered across the news and movies over the years. The Rock. Her heartbeat quickened, but she did what she was trained to do. Stay calm. This was a customer. No more, no less. "I'll just have a cappuccino and maybe one of those croissants," Dwayne said softly, his voice polite but reserved. "Absolutely. Anything else?" He shook his head. "That'll be perfect. Thank you." His words were simple, but his tone carried something Dinah couldn't put her finger on. Kindness, maybe, or just sincerity. She scribbled the order, turned back toward the counter, and tried to shake off the flutter in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was nerves or exhaustion, but something about this moment stuck with her. As Dinah prepared the coffee, she couldn't help but glance back toward the corner table. Little did she know, this small interaction was about to turn her entire day and maybe her week on its head. The steam from the cappuccino machine hissed as Dinah frothed the milk. She kept her movements deliberate, steady, anything to distract her from the odd nervous energy twisting in her stomach. "Why am I acting like this?" she thought. Dwayne Johnson of all people. Her eyes darted back to the table. He sat quietly, his posture straight but not stiff. He wasn't scrolling on a phone or typing away on a laptop like most patrons. He simply stared out the window at the street beyond, lost in his thoughts. Occasionally, he sipped water from the glass she had dropped off earlier. By the time the cappuccino and croissant were ready, Dinah had settled herself. She balanced the tray carefully and approached his table. "Here you go," she said gently, placing the cup and pastry down in front of him. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Thank you." "You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else," she replied, keeping her tone neutral but polite. As Dinah turned to walk back to the counter, something stopped her. Maybe it was the feeling of his eyes still on her, curious but not invasive, or maybe it was just her own tiredness making her self-conscious. Either way, her heart fluttered again. Minutes passed, and Dinah busied herself with cleaning empty tables and refilling sugar containers. The cafe had grown quiet again, save for the faint hum of background music coming from the speakers. She felt the weight of the room in a way she hadn't before, like something invisible was pressing against her, urging her to pay attention. Out of the corner of her eye, Dinah noticed Dwayne pull a pen from his pocket and lean over the receipt. As his meal came to an end, he scribbled something quickly, almost as if he didn't want anyone to notice, folded the paper neatly and tucked it beneath the empty coffee cup. Then he stood, gathering his phone and coat. Dinah watched him for a split second before she forced herself to focus. "Thank you for coming," she called out softly as he passed by. Dwayne turned back just slightly and smiled. "Have a good day." Those words lingered longer than they should have. Dinah stood there frozen in the middle of the cafe, her eyes following him as he exited with his security close behind. The bell above the door chimed one last time, and then the room was quiet again. She let out a slow breath, picked up her tray, and made her way over to clear the table. The cappuccino cup sat empty, a small residue of foam clinging to its rim. Beside it, the croissant plate held nothing but crumbs. And there it was, the receipt. Dinah picked it up carefully, the folded paper feeling heavier heavier than it should have been. Her first thought was of the tip. Maybe it would be generous, but that wasn't uncommon with wealthy customers. They often threw money around to make up for their lack of interaction, but as she unfolded the receipt, the air in her chest vanished. At the bottom, beneath the total, was a number, a tip so large it made her stomach drop, 4 crisp digits, and above it, a handwritten note. Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong, brighter days are coming. Dinah's hands began to tremble. She read the words again, this time slower, letting every sentence sink in. Her eyes darted to the door where Dwayne had disappeared, and her vision blurred as hot tears pooled in her eyes. Her knees felt weak. She stumbled back into the empty chair across from where he'd sat and just stared. The note, the tip. It wasn't about the money, it was the words. The weight of empathy written in ink by someone she never imagined would notice her existence. For the first time in weeks, months even, Dinah felt seen. As the tears streamed down her face, she thought about what those words meant. But this moment wasn't over, not yet. Someone else would see the note, and Dinah's story was about to ripple far beyond the walls of the cafe. The sound of the cafe door opening jolted Dinah from her trance. She wiped her tears quickly with the back of her hand, tucking the note into her apron pocket as her manager approached. You okay? Her manager asked, narrowing her eyes in concern. What happened? Dinah hesitated for a second, trying to find the right words. I'm fine, she said, though her voice cracked slightly. Just a really generous tip. Her manager raised an eyebrow, not convinced. Generous enough to make you cry. Dinah nodded, managing a shaky laugh as she reached for the folded receipt and held it out. The moment her manager saw the number, she let out a low whistle. No way. Corner table, Dinah replied, her voice softer now. That was Dwayne Johnson? Her manager blinked. Yeah, Dinah said, pulling the note from her pocket. But it's not just the money. She handed the note over carefully as though it might crumble in her hands. Her manager read it, and for the first time in months, Dinah saw a genuine softness in her boss's eyes. Wow, she whispered, handing the note back. That's something else. It really is, Dinah agreed, folding the note again like it was some kind of treasure. I don't even know why he wrote it. I didn't do anything special. Her manager looked at her for a long moment. Sometimes people just know, Dinah. They can see what you're going through, even if you think you're hiding it. You're here every day, working your tail off, always kind to customers, even the ones who don't deserve it. Maybe he saw that. Dinah swallowed hard. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. For months, she'd been treading water, working double shifts to pay rent, skipping meals to make sure she could cover her mom's prescriptions. She'd been kind because it was the only part of herself she hadn't let the world take away, and somehow he'd seen that. As the minutes passed, a strange buzz filled the cafe. A couple of coworkers whispered by the pastry display, pointing toward the table where Dwayne had sat. News traveled quickly, and it wasn't long before one of the baristas came up to her. You served him, didn't you? The girl asked, her voice somewhere between excitement and disbelief. What did he say? Was he nice? Dinah smiled faintly. Yeah, he was really nice. Man, I'd freak out, the barista laughed. That's so crazy. Dinah didn't say anything more. She didn't want to explain the note or the tip. Somehow sharing it felt like taking something sacred and putting it on display. For now, it was hers. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Every interaction felt lighter somehow. Every table she cleared a little easier. When she finally pulled off her apron at the end of the day, the folded note remained safe in her pocket. As Dinah made her way to the subway station, she found herself holding the receipt again, staring at the words. My family has been where you are. So we've reached the end of our story. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments.